Tonight, you are not here to fix your mind. You are not here to calm it, discipline it, or silence it by force. If your mind refuses to slow down, that does not mean something is wrong with you. It means your mind has been doing exactly what it was trained to do all day long. Buddhism never treated restlessness as an enemy. It treated it as a message. The problem is not that thoughts appear. The problem is that you believe you must follow them. So tonight, there will be no effort, no control, no attempt to fall asleep. These Zen stories are not meant to push you into sleep. They are meant to remove the reasons you stay awake. Let the mind do whatever it wants. You don't need to go with it. 1. The mind does not slow down when you command it. A Zen master was once asked how to stop the mind from racing at night. The student was exhausted. Every evening, the moment his body touched the bed, his thoughts exploded. Plans, memories, conversations, worries, and imagined futures all rushed in at once. He had tried everything: breathing techniques, counting, forcing himself to think positively, scolding himself for not being calm. Nothing worked. The master listened quietly, then said, "If you shout at a river to become still, does it listen, or does it rush louder around the rocks?" This response sounds poetic, but it is extremely practical. The river does not become violent because it is bad. It becomes turbulent because something is obstructing its natural flow. Rocks do not calm water, they agitate it. The mind behaves the same way. Most people believe the mind should obey commands. Be quiet. Stop thinking. Relax. Sleep now. But the mind is not a soldier waiting for orders. It is a process. It moves according to energy, habit, and attention. When you command it, you introduce resistance, and resistance always creates friction. That friction is what you feel as mental noise. When you lie in bed telling yourself that you must fall asleep, the mind hears urgency. When you criticize yourself for being restless, the mind hears threat. When you try to force calm, the mind prepares to defend itself. So instead of slowing down, it speeds up. This is why the nights feel louder than the days. During the day, the mind is busy reacting to the world. At night, the world goes quiet, and the mind finally hears itself. If you meet that moment with pressure, it reacts the only way it knows how, by producing more thought. Zen never treats this as a failure. It treats it as cause and effect. Zen teaches that the mind is not calmed by authority, but by understanding. You cannot dominate your own nervous system into peace. You can only create the conditions where peace becomes unnecessary to chase. Thoughts continue because they are rewarded with attention. This is not a metaphor. It is literal. Every time a thought appears and you engage with it, even negatively, you feed it energy. Arguing with a thought is still attention. Trying to push it away is still attention. Judging yourself for having it is still attention. The mind does not care whether attention is positive or negative. It only registers that something is important. So when you lie awake thinking, "I must stop thinking," you have already told the mind that thinking is urgent. Zen flips this approach completely. Instead of trying to stop thoughts, Zen practice invites you to watch them without interference. Watching does not mean analyzing, it means noticing without commentary. A thought arises. You do not chase it, you do not complete it, you do not correct it. You do not suppress it. You let it pass like a sound in the distance. When thoughts are not rewarded with engagement, they weaken on their own, not instantly, and not dramatically but naturally. Just like a fire fades when no new fuel is added. This is why Zen masters often appear unconcerned with mental noise. They understand something most people miss: the mind exhausts itself when it is not resisted. Tonight, you are not trying to slow the mind. That effort is exactly what keeps it active. Tonight, you are simply no longer feeding it urgency. You are not late. You are not failing. You are not doing anything wrong. The mind can think. That is its job. You are not required to supervise it. When you stop commanding the mind to behave, it no longer needs to rebel. When you stop demanding silence, the mind no longer has to prove its existence through noise. Eventually, without instruction, without force, without you noticing the exact moment, the flow begins to soften. Thoughts become less sharp. Gaps appear between them. The body recognizes safety. The nervous system shifts, not because you succeeded at calming the mind, but because you stopped fighting it. The river slows when the rocks are removed. The mind rests when pressure disappears. And that is where sleep begins. 2. Restlessness is leftover energy, not a personal failure. In Zen practice, a restless mind is never treated as a flaw in character. It is treated as a sign of energy that has nowhere to go. Most people assume that if they cannot sleep, something is wrong with them. They tell themselves they are overthinkers, anxious people, broken sleepers, or mentally weak. This belief alone creates tension before the night has even begun. Zen rejects this framing completely. Restlessness is not evidence of failure, it is evidence of momentum. Throughout the day, the mind is pulled in many directions at once. Conversations that did not finish cleanly, emotions that were felt but not expressed, decisions postponed, reactions swallowed, thoughts interrupted by the next obligation. The body keeps moving, but the mind keeps storing. When the day finally ends, that stored energy looks for release. Night is quiet, there are fewer distractions, no tasks demanding immediate response. So the mind turns inward, not because it wants to torture you, but because this is the first moment it is allowed to speak uninterrupted. The mistake is believing you must resolve everything before you are allowed to rest. Zen teachings point out that this belief is backward. Rest does not come after resolution. Resolution comes after rest. A tired mind cannot untangle itself. It can only loop. When you try to think your way out of exhaustion, the mind repeats the same material again and again, not because it is productive, but because it lacks the energy to move forward. This is why insomnia often feels circular. The same worries return, the same scenes replay, the same conversations echo. The mind is not searching for answers, it is discharging excess energy. Zen monasteries understood this long before modern psychology. Monks were taught that if the mind is active at night, it is not a problem to solve, it is a process to allow. The problem begins when you add judgment. The moment you tell yourself that you should already be asleep, tension appears. The moment you label restlessness as failure, pressure increases. The moment you demand closure before rest, the mind tightens. Zen teaches that pressure traps energy, allowance releases it. You do not need to complete the day mentally before resting physically. The body does not require explanations to sleep. It only requires safety and permission. This is why Zen practice emphasizes letting the day end unfinished. Not everything must be resolved. Not every emotion needs clarity. Not every thought requires a conclusion. The mind believes that unfinished loops are dangerous. Zen teaches that unfinished loops are simply incomplete experiences, and incompleteness is not a threat. Tonight, you are allowed to leave things unresolved. That email does not need rewriting. That conversation does not need a better ending. That future scenario does not need rehearsal. Nothing bad will happen if you rest before you understand. In fact, understanding often arrives more easily after rest because the mind is no longer fighting its own fatigue. Zen views sleep as a natural reset, not a reward. You do not earn it by managing life perfectly. You return to it by stepping out of effort. Restlessness fades when it realizes it is no longer being evaluated. If your thoughts keep moving tonight, let them move. If emotions surface, let them surface. You are not required to organize them. Energy that is not resisted gradually dissipates. Like a wave that reaches the shore, it loses force simply by being allowed to arrive. The body knows how to rest. It has done so since birth. The only interference comes from the belief that you must be mentally complete before you are physically allowed to stop. Zen removes that condition. You do not need closure tonight. You do not need answers tonight. You do not need to understand yourself tonight. You only need permission to pause. And when the mind senses that nothing is demanded of it, it no longer has to keep working. The loops loosen. The urgency dissolves. The leftover energy drains away, not through effort, but through acceptance. Rest is not something you force. It is something that happens when you stop demanding more from yourself. And slowly, naturally, without instruction, the night takes over. 3. Thoughts fade when you stop trying to escape them. A Zen student once told his teacher that the moment he lay down to sleep, his mind became unbearable. During the day, he could function. At night, every thought seemed sharper, louder, and more urgent. He asked the teacher how to make the thoughts go away. The teacher did not give him a technique. Instead, he asked a question. When you hear thunder, the teacher said, do you chase the sound or do you let it pass through the sky? The student did not understand at first. Thunder is not something you interact with. You hear it, and it fades. You do not argue with it. You do not try to silence it. You do not panic because it appeared. You trust that it will pass. Zen teaches that thoughts are the same. Thoughts feel overwhelming not because they exist, but because you tense against them. The tension is what makes them feel heavy. The resistance is what gives them substance. Most people believe they are exhausted because they think too much. Zen says something different. You are exhausted because you struggle with thinking. The moment a thought appears, the mind reacts. It judges the thought. It worries about the meaning of the thought. It tries to push the thought away or replace it with a better one. Each of these reactions adds energy. At night, when the body is still, this extra energy has nowhere to go. So the thought loops, not because it is important, but because it is being held in place by resistance. Zen practice does not try to remove thoughts. It removes the struggle around them. A thought that is allowed to exist without interference is surprisingly weak. It arises, lingers briefly, and fades. But when you fight a thought, you give it something to push against. That push is what keeps it alive. This is why trying to distract yourself from thoughts often fails at night. Distraction is still avoidance. The mind senses avoidance as danger and responds by producing more material, louder and faster, to ensure it is noticed. Zen takes the opposite approach. Instead of escaping thoughts, Zen invites you to stay exactly where you are, without involvement. This does not mean you analyze the thought. It does not mean you complete it. It does not mean you solve it. It means you let the thought appear and refuse to chase it. Imagine sitting by a road at night. Cars pass by. You do not run after each one to see where it is going. You simply notice the sound and let it fade into the distance. Thoughts behave the same way when they are not pursued. What makes this difficult is habit. You have spent your entire life responding to thoughts as if they require action. At night, when action is impossible, the habit remains, and frustration builds. Zen gently breaks this habit by removing urgency. A thought appears. You do nothing. Another thought appears. You do nothing again. At first, this feels uncomfortable. The mind is used to being engaged. It may produce more thoughts in an attempt to regain control. This is normal. Zen never treats this as a setback. It is simply the mind exhausting its old patterns. Like a child who keeps asking questions to see if someone is listening, the mind tests whether it still has your attention. When it realizes there is no response, it gradually quiets. Not because it was forced to be silent, but because it no longer has a reason to speak. Zen emphasizes that you do not need to like your thoughts. You only need to stop reacting to them. A worrying thought does not require reassurance. A memory does not require correction. A plan does not require completion. The moment you stop trying to escape your own mind, the mind stops chasing you. This is one of the most misunderstood ideas in Buddhism. People assume peace comes from removing unpleasant experiences. Zen teaches that peace comes from ending resistance to experience. Night magnifies whatever you resist. If you resist fear, fear grows. If you resist thinking, thinking multiplies. If you resist wakefulness, wakefulness persists. When resistance ends, intensity fades. Tonight you are not trying to empty your mind. You are simply letting it be full without involvement. You are not trapped in your thoughts. You are witnessing them pass through awareness, and awareness itself is already calm. Eventually, without effort, gaps begin to appear, small spaces between thoughts, moments where nothing needs to happen. The body recognizes these gaps as safety, breathing softens, muscles release. Sleep does not arrive because you chased it. It arrives because you stopped running from what was already there. Thoughts fade when you stop trying to escape them. Not because you defeated them, but because you no longer needed to. 4. You are not required to solve your life at night. A common belief quietly controls the mind at night. It is the belief that if something remains unresolved, it is dangerous to rest. That if you do not think hard enough now, you will miss your chance to fix something important. Zen sees this belief as confusion, not wisdom. Night was never meant for understanding. Night was meant for withdrawal. Throughout the day, the mind is trained to respond. Decisions are made, problems are addressed, and attention is pulled outward. When the day ends, that momentum does not immediately stop. The mind continues scanning for tasks, because that is what it has been doing for hours. When the lights go out and the body becomes still, the mind misinterprets the silence as a signal to work harder. It brings up plans, mistakes, and future scenarios, not because they are urgent, but because the habit of problem solving has not yet disengaged. Zen practice does not tell the mind to stop thinking. It tells the practitioner to stop believing that every thought requires resolution. There is a profound difference. A Zen teacher once told his students that the mind is like a clerk who does not know when the office is closed. If no one locks the door, the clerk will keep working through the night, shuffling papers that no longer need attention. Night is not the time to reorganize your life. It is the time to close the office. Nothing meaningful is solved by exhaustion. When the mind is tired, it loses perspective. It repeats the same material, not because new insights are forming, but because it lacks the energy to move forward. What feels like deep thinking is often just mental looping. Zen recognizes this and removes the pressure to understand. You do not need clarity tonight. You do not need certainty tonight. You do not need answers tonight. Tomorrow will still exist even if you rest. This is not avoidance. It is intelligence. Zen does not ask you to abandon responsibility. It asks you to place responsibility in the correct time. There is a time for effort and a time for release. Mixing the two creates suffering. Trying to solve your life at night is like trying to sharpen a blade by rubbing it on soft cloth. The action feels busy, but nothing improves. Rest is what restores the sharpness. Another mistake people make is believing that worrying proves they care. Zen sees worry as a misunderstanding of care. Caring does not require constant mental rehearsal. Presence and rest support better action than anxiety ever could. When you lie awake reviewing your past or anticipating your future, the mind is trying to protect you. But protection through exhaustion only weakens you. Zen teaches trust in sequence. Rest first, clarity later. You are allowed to pause without justification. This is difficult for many people because the mind associates stopping with loss. It believes that if it does not stay alert, something will go wrong. Zen gently dismantles this belief by pointing to experience. Think of how many times clarity arrived after sleep, not before it. Think of how many decisions look different in the morning. Think of how many worries lost their intensity after rest. The mind is not wiser at night. It is louder. Zen does not silence the mind by force. It removes the belief that night thinking is useful. Tonight you are not required to complete anything. You are not required to improve yourself. You are not required to be prepared. The world does not collapse because you rest. Your life does not pause because you sleep. Everything continues without your supervision. This understanding softens the grip of thought. The mind begins to release its hold on imagined responsibility. The body senses that vigilance is no longer necessary. Breathing deepens. Muscles loosen. The urgency fades. Sleep does not come because you solved something. It comes because you stopped asking the night to do the work of the day. And in that surrender, rest becomes natural again. 5. Stillness is not created. It is revealed. One of the quiet misunderstandings about rest is the belief that stillness is something you must produce. People assume that calm is an achievement, a state you reach by doing something correctly. When stillness does not appear, they assume they are failing. Zen does not see stillness this way. In Zen teaching, stillness is not an object to chase. It is the natural condition that remains when interference stops. It is not something you add to yourself. It is something that becomes visible when effort fades. This distinction matters more than it seems. When you try to become calm, you introduce intention. Intention requires monitoring. Monitoring creates tension, and tension is the opposite of stillness. So the very act of trying to be calm keeps the nervous system active. Zen stories often use simple images to explain this. One of the most common is muddy water. When water is disturbed, it becomes cloudy. If you keep stirring it to make it clear, the mud never settles. But if you leave it alone, clarity appears on its own. The water did not learn how to become clear. The mud did not need to be removed. Nothing new was added. Interference stopped, and stillness revealed itself. The mind works the same way. During the day, the mind is constantly stirred. Attention jumps from task to task. Emotions are triggered, suppressed, redirected. Thoughts are interrupted and resumed. By the time night arrives, the mind is already cloudy. When you lie down and try to force clarity, you stir it again. Zen practice asks for something counterintuitive. It asks you to stop trying to settle the mind. This does not mean you ignore the mind. It means you stop manipulating it. Stillness does not require you to relax correctly. It does not require silence. It does not require positive thoughts. Stillness is present even when the mind is noisy. This idea can feel confusing because people associate stillness with the absence of thought. Zen separates the two. Stillness is not the lack of movement. It is the absence of struggle against movement. A lake can be still even when ripples appear on its surface. The depth remains undisturbed. Your awareness is like that depth. Thoughts may continue. Sensations may arise, but beneath them there is already a quiet that does not need maintenance. You do not have to enter it. You are already within it. The problem is that effort keeps pulling attention to the surface. When you stop trying to become still, the body begins to recognize safety. The nervous system is highly sensitive to effort. Effort signals that something needs fixing. When there is nothing to fix, the system downshifts. This is why people often fall asleep. Not when they try to, but when they give up trying. Giving up here does not mean despair. It means relinquishing control. Zen does not demand that you empty your mind. It invites you to notice that awareness remains calm even when the mind is active. You are not the movement. You are the space in which movement occurs. Tonight you are not required to settle anything. You do not need to smooth your thoughts. You do not need to slow your breathing. You do not need to reach a state. The mind may continue doing what it does. That is fine. Stillness does not disappear because thoughts exist. It disappears only when you fight them. As effort drains away, attention naturally drops beneath the noise, not deliberately, but spontaneously. The body relaxes because it senses there is no demand. Muscles release without instruction. Breathing finds its own rhythm. Sleep approaches quietly, not as an event you notice, not as a goal you achieve, but as a natural consequence of non-interference. Stillness was never missing. It was only covered by effort. And when effort ends, what remains does not need to be named. 6. Letting go is not an action, it is a cessation. Most people believe letting go is something you must actively do, as if it were another task added to an already crowded mind. They hear the phrase and immediately search for a method, a posture, a decision, or a moment of effort where they finally release everything. Zen points out that this misunderstanding quietly keeps people awake. When you try to let go, you are still holding on to the idea that something must be done correctly. In Zen, letting go is not an action layered on top of tension. It is what happens when unnecessary effort stops. You do not drop a burden by tightening your grip on it and demanding release. You drop it by realizing you no longer need to carry it. The moment that realization becomes genuine, the grip loosens on its own. At night, the mind often mistakes holding for safety. It keeps thoughts active because it believes vigilance prevents harm. Plans are reviewed, mistakes replayed, futures rehearsed, not because these activities are helpful in that moment, but because the mind associates constant engagement with protection. Zen does not argue with this instinct. It simply reveals that the instinct is outdated in the quiet of the night. Letting go, then, is not about pushing thoughts away or replacing them with better ones. It is about recognizing that you are no longer required to supervise the mind. You are not abandoning responsibility. You are placing it down temporarily, trusting that nothing catastrophic happens when you stop managing every detail. When a thought appears and you try to let it go, you often tighten around it without noticing. You watch it too closely. You judge how long it stays. You check whether it has left. This monitoring is still grasping. Zen teaches that real release has no audience. It happens when attention stops interfering. Imagine holding a rope tightly for a long time. Your hand is tired, but you believe you must keep gripping or something bad will occur. The moment you realize the rope is attached to nothing important, your fingers open without instruction. You do not need to tell them how, they simply stop contracting. This is the nature of cessation. It is not dramatic, it does not announce itself. It is the quiet ending of effort. At night, you are not required to drop your thoughts. You are only asked to notice where you are gripping them. The grip might be subtle. It might look like trying to understand the thought, finishing it, or preparing for it. When you stop doing these things, not because you forced yourself, but because you see they are unnecessary, release happens naturally. Zen emphasizes that you cannot force cessation. You can only stop creating what needs to be ceased. When effort drains away, the body recognizes that there is no task left. Muscles soften. Breathing deepens without instruction. The mind continues to produce thoughts for a while, but they lose their urgency because they are no longer being held in place. This is why sleep often arrives after a moment of surrender that feels like giving up. It is not resignation. It is the end of resistance. The system realizes it no longer needs to maintain alertness. You are not letting go of your life. You are letting go of the idea that life must be managed at this hour. Nothing meaningful is lost when you stop gripping. In fact, clarity and energy are preserved. Tonight, you do not need to release anything deliberately. You only need to stop tightening. The difference is subtle, but it changes everything. When holding ends, even briefly, the mind no longer has a reason to stay awake. And without effort, without decision, without a clear boundary you can point to, rest takes over. 7. Sleep arrives when the struggle ends. Zen teaches that sleep is not something you reach through effort, but something that happens when effort is no longer required. This idea runs against almost everything people believe about rest. Most people treat sleep like a task that must be completed successfully. They evaluate themselves based on how quickly it arrives and how deeply it holds. The mind watches the clock, measures progress, and creates pressure where none is needed. The moment sleep becomes a goal, the struggle begins. At night, the body already knows how to rest. It has been doing this since before you learned language. Breathing, digestion, and recovery all slow down naturally when conditions feel safe. The problem is not that the body forgot how to sleep. The problem is that the mind refuses to stop interfering. Struggle is subtle. It does not always look like panic. Sometimes it appears as monitoring. You check whether you are sleepy enough. You notice whether thoughts are slowing. You wait for a sign that sleep is close. This quiet vigilance tells the nervous system that something important is at stake. As long as something feels at stake, the system stays alert. Zen does not try to convince the mind to stop struggling. It removes the reason to struggle. Sleep does not arrive because you finally think the right thought. It arrives because there is no longer anything to manage. When the mind stops supervising the process, the body takes over. A Zen teacher once said that people fail to sleep not because they are awake, but because they are trying to sleep. This statement sounds paradoxical until you feel it. Trying contains effort. Effort contains tension. Tension keeps the system active. The end of struggle is not dramatic. It often feels like indifference. You stop caring whether sleep comes now or later. You stop negotiating with your thoughts. You stop evaluating the moment. This is not apathy. It is relief. When struggle ends, time loses importance. Minutes are no longer counted. The future is no longer rehearsed. The mind no longer scans for improvement. In this state, even wakefulness is restful because it is no longer resisted. Zen emphasizes that awareness itself does not need sleep. Only the body does. When awareness stops interfering with the body's rhythms, the transition happens naturally. This is why people sometimes fall asleep during quiet activities without trying. A slow train ride, gentle music, a familiar voice. In those moments there is no demand placed on the mind. There is nothing to achieve. Sleep slips in unnoticed. At night, Zen invites you to adopt the same attitude, not through technique, but through understanding. You do not need to create the perfect environment. You do not need to eliminate every thought. You do not need to reach a certain feeling. You only need to stop struggling with what is already happening. If you are awake, that is allowed. If thoughts are present, that is allowed. If sleep has not arrived yet, that is allowed. Allowance removes pressure. Pressure is the last thing keeping the system alert. The moment you stop asking, "Why am I not asleep yet?" the question dissolves. Without the question, there is no urgency. Without urgency, the body recognizes safety. Sleep often arrives not at the peak of calm, but in the absence of effort. It comes when you are no longer watching for it. There is no clear moment of entry. One thought fades, another does not form, and suddenly the struggle is over. Zen does not promise sleep on command. It promises something more reliable, the end of unnecessary effort. When effort ends, rest becomes inevitable. Tonight you are not waiting for sleep. You are resting in the absence of struggle. And when the struggle ends, sleep no longer has an obstacle. 8. Awareness itself is already rest. One of the most overlooked teachings in Zen is the idea that rest does not begin when sleep begins. Rest begins much earlier, at the moment you stop identifying with the activity of the mind. Most people assume that being awake automatically means being tense, alert, or strained. Zen makes a careful distinction here. Wakefulness is not the same as effort. Awareness is not the same as work. When you lie awake at night, the discomfort usually does not come from being conscious. It comes from believing that consciousness must be doing something useful. The mind treats awareness like a tool that should be applied, directed, and managed. Zen gently dismantles this belief by pointing out that awareness exists before effort and remains after effort ends. You are aware even when you are not trying. You are aware even when nothing is happening. You are aware even when the mind is quiet or loud. This awareness is not tense by nature. It does not strain. It does not push. It simply knows. The problem begins when awareness gets tangled with responsibility. You start to believe that because you are aware, you must also be controlling, evaluating, or fixing. Zen separates these functions completely. Awareness does not need to manage the mind. It does not need to guide thoughts. It does not need to decide what comes next. At night, this misunderstanding becomes especially exhausting. You are aware of thoughts, sensations, and time passing, and you assume that awareness must now intervene. You try to steer the experience toward sleep, toward calm, toward resolution. In doing so, you turn simple awareness into effort. Zen invites you to notice that awareness itself is already effortless. Right now you are aware of sound without trying. You are aware of sensation without effort. You are aware of thought without manufacturing it. Awareness does not require tension. It does not need improvement. It does not need direction. When Zen teachers speak of rest, they are not always speaking of sleep. They are speaking of the resting of awareness in itself. This is a state where you are conscious but not strained, present but not involved. In this state, the body begins to rest even if sleep has not yet arrived. This is why Zen does not rush the transition into sleep. It values this intermediate space where awareness is free from demand. In this space, the nervous system begins to settle because it no longer receives signals of urgency. You do not need to stop being aware in order to rest. You only need to stop using awareness as a tool. The moment you stop monitoring your state, awareness relaxes back into its natural condition. Thoughts may still appear, but they are seen rather than followed. Sensations may still be present, but they are not interpreted as problems. Time may pass, but it is no longer measured. This kind of rest is subtle, but it is real. It restores the system because it removes the constant micro-effort of control. Even before sleep arrives, the body benefits. Zen points out something quietly radical here. If awareness itself is already at rest, then there is no urgency to escape wakefulness. Wakefulness loses its threat. When wakefulness is no longer resisted, it no longer keeps the body alert. Many people fall asleep only after this shift occurs. Not when the mind becomes perfectly quiet, but when awareness stops leaning forward. The system senses that nothing is being demanded. That is the signal it has been waiting for. Tonight, you are allowed to be aware without purpose. You are allowed to notice without managing. You are allowed to remain conscious without effort. Awareness does not need sleep to be at peace. The body does, and when awareness steps back from control, the body is finally free to do what it already knows how to do. Rest does not begin with unconsciousness, it begins with the end of strain. And from that place, sleep arrives naturally, not as something you chase, but as something that follows when there is nothing left to hold. 9. The body leads, the mind follows. Zen places quiet trust in the body's intelligence. Long before the mind learned language, the body learned rhythm. It learned when to contract and when to soften, when to move and when to rest. Sleep belongs to this older intelligence. The difficulty at night is not that the body forgets how to sleep, but that the mind tries to take over a process it does not understand. When the mind leads, it asks questions. Am I relaxed enough? Is this working? How long has it been? These questions pull attention upward into evaluation. Evaluation signals effort. Effort tells the nervous system to stay alert. The body waits. Zen reverses this order. It lets the body lead and allows the mind to follow. This does not require instruction or technique. The body is already communicating. The weight of the limbs, the natural rhythm of breath, the gradual softening of muscles that no longer need to hold posture. These signals are subtle, and the mind often ignores them because it is busy trying to manage outcomes. When attention returns to the body without analysis, something shifts. You are no longer asking the mind to produce calm. You are allowing the body to demonstrate it. Zen teachers often remind students that the body relaxes before the mind does. This is why trying to think your way into sleep fails. Thought is upstream, sleep begins downstream. As the body settles, the mind loses momentum, not because you silenced it, but because it no longer has fuel. Mental activity requires bodily tension to sustain itself. When tension drains, thought slows. This is why even difficult thoughts lose their grip when the body feels safe. The same worry that feels overwhelming during the day becomes distant at night once the body truly relaxes. The content did not change. The physical context did. Zen does not ask you to focus on the body in a controlling way. It asks you to notice without direction. You are not scanning for relaxation. You are simply allowing sensation to exist without commentary. The body does not need encouragement. It does not need permission. It only needs non-interference. When the mind stops interrupting the body's signals, the natural sequence resumes. Breathing deepens without effort. The heart rate slows. Muscles release in layers, not all at once, but gradually as safety is confirmed. This is not something you make happen. It is something you stop preventing. Zen views sleep as a cooperative process. The body initiates, the mind steps aside. When the mind insists on leading, cooperation breaks down. When the mind follows, harmony returns. Tonight you do not need to convince yourself that it is time to sleep. The body already knows. You do not need to instruct it. You only need to stop overriding it with urgency. Let the body do what it has always done. Let sensation unfold without naming it. Let comfort appear without being checked. As the body leads, the mind naturally quiets. Thoughts lose sharpness. Attention sinks. There is no clear moment when the transition occurs. One moment you are aware of sensation. The next, awareness loosens its grip. Sleep arrives not because the mind succeeded, but because it finally allowed the body to take over. And in that allowance, rest becomes inevitable. 10. Nothing needs to happen for rest to be complete. One of the final obstacles to deep rest is the belief that something must change before rest is allowed. The mind waits for a signal, a certain feeling, a drop in thoughts, a wave of heaviness. It assumes that rest begins only after a noticeable shift occurs. Zen gently dismantles this belief by pointing out that waiting itself is effort, and effort is what keeps the system awake. Rest does not require a milestone. It does not require progress. It does not require confirmation. When you wait for something to happen, attention leans forward. Leaning forward creates subtle tension. Tension communicates to the nervous system that something is unfinished. As long as something feels unfinished, vigilance remains active. Zen does not promise a dramatic transition into sleep. It removes the idea that a transition is necessary. Many people stay awake because they are watching for rest instead of allowing it. They monitor their state. They check whether the mind is slowing. They notice whether the body feels heavy enough. This monitoring may seem passive, but it is not. It is a form of control, and control keeps the system alert. Zen practice invites a radical shift. Nothing needs to happen next. You are not waiting for calm. You are not waiting for silence. You are not waiting for sleep. You are already allowed to rest exactly as you are. This does not mean sleep will never arrive. It means sleep no longer has to prove itself. When there is no requirement to arrive, it arrives on its own schedule. Zen teachers often describe rest as completeness rather than absence. Completeness means nothing is missing. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be removed. The moment you feel that something must still happen, completeness is interrupted. At night, this belief shows up quietly. You think, once my thoughts stop, then I can rest. Once my body relaxes more, then I can sleep. Once I feel different, then it will be okay. Zen points out that these conditions postpone rest indefinitely. Rest does not come after conditions are met. Conditions relax after rest is allowed. When you stop waiting, time loses urgency. Minutes pass without being counted. Awareness settles without direction. The system no longer scans for improvement. In this absence of demand, the body recognizes that vigilance is unnecessary. Nothing needs to happen for rest to be complete, because rest is not an event. It is the absence of demand. Zen does not ask you to trust sleep. It asks you to trust the present moment as sufficient. When the present moment is no longer treated as a problem to be solved, effort dissolves. You may still be awake. That is not a failure. You may still be aware. That is not a problem. You may still have thoughts. That is not an obstacle. The obstacle was the belief that something else was required. When that belief loosens, rest deepens immediately, even before sleep appears. The body benefits. The nervous system softens. Awareness stops leaning forward. Sleep often arrives quietly after this point, not because it was summoned, but because there was finally nothing standing in its way. Nothing needs to happen. Nothing needs to change. Nothing needs to be achieved. Rest is already complete when demand ends. 11. Trust replaces control when the mind stops gripping time. One of the deepest reasons the mind refuses to rest at night is its relationship with time. During the day, time is something you manage. You schedule it, measure it, race against it, and worry about losing it. When night arrives, the habit does not automatically stop. The mind keeps counting, checking, estimating, and anticipating, even when there is nothing left to do. Zen sees this habit clearly and treats it gently. It does not argue with the mind's desire to control time. It simply shows that control is unnecessary once the day has ended. At night, time does not need supervision. The mind believes that staying alert preserves control. It fears that if it stops monitoring time, something important will slip away. This fear is subtle. It appears as checking the clock, estimating how many hours of sleep remain, or calculating how tired tomorrow might feel. None of these actions are helpful, but they feel compelling because they give the illusion of control. Zen points out that this illusion is what keeps the mind awake. When you track time, you lean into the future. When you lean into the future, you pull yourself out of the present. The present is where rest lives. The future is where effort lives. Trust is the antidote, but Zen's idea of trust is not blind faith. It is practical understanding. Trust arises when you recognize that the body has navigated nights successfully long before you learn to count hours. Sleep does not require calculation. It requires release. Control and trust cannot coexist. As long as you are trying to manage time, you are signaling that something is at risk. The nervous system responds by staying alert. When control ends, trust appears naturally. This does not mean you force yourself to trust. That would be another form of effort. It means you notice that control is no longer useful in this moment. The day has already happened. Tomorrow cannot be accessed now. Nothing is improved by counting minutes in the dark. Zen practice encourages you to let time become vague, not ignored, but unfocused. When time loses precision, urgency fades. When urgency fades, the body senses safety. This is why people often sleep better when they remove clocks from the bedroom. It is not superstition. It is physiology. Without constant reminders of passing time, the mind loosens its grip. Zen takes this further. It invites you to let go of the idea that the night must be used efficiently. Night is not a resource to optimize. It is a period of withdrawal. When the mind stops treating time as something to be managed, it stops pushing against the present. Trust grows quietly here. Trust that the body will take rest when it needs it. Trust that awareness does not need to track progress. Trust that nothing is being lost by not watching. This trust does not require belief. It requires non-interference. As the grip on time loosens, thoughts lose their edge. Planning thoughts fade because planning requires a future. Evaluative thoughts fade because evaluation requires comparison. What remains is simple presence without direction. In this presence, the body does not need instruction. It recognizes the absence of demand and responds by settling. Breathing slows. Muscles soften. The sense of waiting dissolves. Sleep often arrives after trust replaces control, not because you decided to trust, but because you stopped gripping time tightly enough to need control. Tonight you do not need to know what time it is. You do not need to know how long you have been awake. You do not need to know when sleep will come. The body already knows what to do when the mind steps out of the way. When control ends, trust remains. And when trust remains, rest follows naturally. 12. Sleep is not a state you enter. It is a state you stop preventing. Many people imagine sleep as a destination, a place the mind must reach. They picture a doorway they must pass through, a switch that must flip, or a moment that must arrive. This way of thinking quietly turns sleep into a performance. You begin to assess whether you are close, whether you are doing it right, whether you are drifting fast enough. Zen sees this as the final misunderstanding that keeps rest away. Sleep is not something you enter. It is something that happens when obstruction ends. From a Zen perspective, the body is always moving toward rest when conditions allow. It does not need instruction. It does not need encouragement. It does not need to be reminded of the goal. The only thing that interferes is the mind's habit of monitoring and controlling the process. When you try to enter sleep, you lean forward. Leaning forward creates effort. Effort keeps the nervous system engaged. Engagement delays the transition. Zen removes the idea of transition altogether. There is no moment you must catch. There is no edge you must cross. There is no signal you must wait for. Sleep does not begin at a precise second. It emerges gradually when vigilance fades. The problem is not that sleep is far away. The problem is that vigilance is still active. At night, vigilance often disguises itself as patience. You tell yourself you are simply waiting, but waiting implies expectation, and expectation implies monitoring. Monitoring keeps awareness sharp. Sharp awareness keeps the system awake. Zen invites a different orientation, not waiting for sleep, but resting without expecting anything. This does not mean you force yourself to stop caring. It means you notice that caring about the arrival of sleep has not been helpful. When this recognition is honest, effort relaxes on its own. Sleep is prevented by subtle actions, checking your state, noticing how relaxed you are, wondering if this sensation means you are close. These actions are small, but they add up. They keep attention active at the very moment it needs to soften. Zen does not criticize these habits. It simply shows their effect. When nothing is being watched, the body transitions naturally. When nothing is being measured, rhythm returns. When nothing is expected, awareness loosens its grip. This is why people often fall asleep during moments of absorption, not intention. Listening to a familiar voice, watching something gentle without interest, being present without purpose. In those moments, the mind is not trying to enter sleep. It is simply not preventing it. Zen suggests that you allow the night to unfold without participation. You are not guiding the process. You are not resisting it either. You are letting it happen without supervision. You do not need to fall asleep. You do not need to drift. You do not need to reach a certain depth. The body knows how to cross from wakefulness into sleep when vigilance is gone. That crossing does not need witnesses. When you stop trying to enter sleep, sleep no longer has to wait for you to be ready. It arrives quietly, without announcement, without a clear boundary you can point to afterward. Often, you only realize sleep has occurred when you wake up. Zen does not promise immediate sleep. It promises something more fundamental: the end of interference. When interference ends, the natural order resumes. Tonight, you are not entering sleep. You are stepping out of its way. And when nothing blocks it, sleep does what it has always done, gently, inevitably, without asking for your help. 13. The night does not demand performance, only presence. One of the quiet pressures people carry into the night is the belief that they must perform rest correctly. They evaluate how well they are relaxing, how deeply they are breathing, how calm their mind feels, and how quickly sleep arrives. Without realizing it, they turn the night into another arena for success and failure. Zen recognizes this tendency and gently removes it. The night is not a test. There is nothing to achieve once the day has ended, no standard to meet, no correct way to rest. The body and mind are not being graded on how quickly they shut down. Performance belongs to daylight. Night belongs to release. Zen teachings often describe night as a return rather than an accomplishment. A return to simplicity, to reduced demand, to being rather than doing. When performance is removed, pressure dissolves. The mind resists this at first because it is accustomed to evaluation. It wants feedback. It wants confirmation that rest is happening properly. It asks questions like, am I doing this right? Am I relaxed enough? Why am I still awake? These questions feel innocent, but they carry demand. Demand keeps the system alert. Zen does not ask the mind to stop asking questions. It asks you to stop treating the questions as important. When questions are not answered or engaged, they lose energy. The mind learns that nothing is required. Presence is enough. Presence does not mean intense awareness. It means simple availability to what is already here, sensation without analysis, sound without interpretation, thought without completion. You are present even when the mind wanders. You are present even when awareness drifts. You are present even when sleep has not yet arrived. This is why Zen emphasizes sitting without goal. When there is no outcome to measure, the nervous system relaxes. The same principle applies at night. When the night is not judged by results, the body feels safe enough to rest. Performance anxiety is one of the most common hidden causes of insomnia. People do not realize they are trying to succeed at sleeping. Zen exposes this gently by asking a simple question: who is watching, and what are they waiting for? When there is no audience, performance ends. The night does not care whether you fall asleep quickly or slowly. It does not care whether thoughts appear or disappear. It does not care whether rest comes in waves or all at once. Only the mind cares. When you stop performing for the mind relaxes. It no longer needs to evaluate progress. It no longer needs to signal urgency. It steps back because its role is no longer required. Presence remains. In this presence, there is no effort to rest. Rest happens because there is no demand not to rest. The body senses this immediately. Tension drains without instruction. Breathing finds its own pace. Awareness softens. Sleep may arrive soon or later. Zen does not promise timing. It promises relief from pressure. Tonight, you do not need to rest well. You do not need to sleep deeply. You do not need to do anything right. You only need to stop performing. The night accepts you exactly as you are, and in that acceptance, the struggle dissolves. Presence is enough. 14. Silence is not the absence of sound, but the absence of resistance. Many people wait for silence before they believe rest is possible. They listen for a moment when thoughts stop, when the environment becomes quiet, when the inner noise finally fades. Zen challenges this expectation by redefining silence completely. Silence is not something that appears when all sound disappears. Silence is what remains when you stop resisting what you hear. This distinction changes everything. Sound is part of life. Thoughts are part of life. Sensations arise because the body is alive and the mind is active. Zen does not treat these as intrusions. It treats resistance to them as the true disturbance. At night, the world feels louder because attention is no longer pulled outward. Every sound stands out. Every thought feels closer. When you resist these experiences, they sharpen. When you allow them, they soften. Zen stories often describe silence as spacious rather than empty. Spaciousness allows movement without disturbance. A bird can fly through the sky without breaking the sky. A thought can pass through awareness without disturbing awareness. The problem is not the presence of sound or thought. The problem is the belief that they must stop before rest can begin. Resistance turns sound into noise. Resistance turns thought into agitation. Resistance turns awareness into tension. When resistance ends, sound becomes background. Thought becomes movement. Awareness becomes wide. Zen does not ask you to block your ears or control your mind. It asks you to notice the difference between hearing and fighting what you hear. If a sound appears, let it appear. Do not label it as distracting. Do not judge it as a problem. The moment you label it, you tighten. Tightening tells the nervous system that something is wrong. When there is no tightening, sound passes through without leaving a mark. The same is true of thoughts. A thought is only loud when you resist it. When you stop pushing against it, it loses its edge. It becomes another movement in awareness, no more disturbing than a breeze. Zen emphasizes that silence is always present beneath activity. You do not need to create it. You only need to stop covering it with resistance. This is why silence often appears after acceptance, not after control. When you accept that sounds and thoughts may come and go, they no longer feel threatening. The system relaxes because nothing needs to be defended against. Silence, in this sense, is not something you wait for. It is something you uncover by releasing opposition. At night, you are not required to make the world quiet. You are not required to empty your mind. You are not required to remove sensation. You are only invited to stop resisting what is already happening. As resistance fades, space opens. Awareness expands. Sounds blend into the background. Thoughts lose their sharpness. The nervous system recognizes safety in this openness. Sleep often arrives here, not because silence finally appeared, but because resistance finally ended. Silence was never missing. It was only misunderstood. And when resistance dissolves, silence reveals itself naturally, holding everything without effort. 15. Rest is trusting that life continues without your control. One of the deepest reasons the mind resists sleep is the fear of losing control. During the day, control feels necessary. You decide, respond, correct, manage, and adjust. These actions create a sense of agency, and agency feels like safety. When night arrives, the mind is asked to release that role, and it hesitates. It worries that if it stops watching, something important will be missed. Zen addresses this fear directly, but gently. It does not argue that control is useless. It simply points out that control has a time and a place, and night is not it. Rest begins when you trust that life continues, even when you are not managing it. This trust is not philosophical, it is experiential. Every night you have ever slept, the world continued without your supervision. Breathing continued, the heart continued, time continued. Problems did not multiply because you were unconscious. In fact, many of them softened. Yet the mind forgets this at night. It believes it must stay alert to preserve stability. It confuses vigilance with responsibility. Zen untangles this confusion by reminding you that the body already knows how to live without constant oversight. Sleep is not surrendering life. It is surrendering unnecessary control. At night, the mind imagines that if it loosens its grip, chaos will enter. Zen asks you to notice how much order already exists without your effort. Digestion does not wait for permission. Healing does not require instruction. Muscles release when they are no longer needed. These processes are intelligent, reliable, and automatic. The need for control is learned. The ability to rest is innate. Zen teaches that true rest is not passive collapse. It is active trust. Trust that the systems supporting you are stronger than your moment-to-moment management. Trust that awareness does not need to supervise the body for the body to function well. When control loosens, something subtle happens. The mind stops scanning for threats. The nervous system downshifts. Vigilance fades because there is nothing left to guard. This is why exhaustion alone does not guarantee sleep. You can be tired and still alert if control is tight. Sleep arrives when control is released, not when energy is depleted. Zen does not ask you to force trust. It invites you to notice that control is no longer helping. When you see clearly that staying alert is not improving anything, the grip loosens on its own. At night, you are not responsible for tomorrow. You are not responsible for fixing the past. You are not responsible for holding the world together. Life is already doing that. Rest is allowing yourself to be supported rather than constantly supporting everything else. It is allowing the body to carry itself. It is allowing awareness to remain without directing. This is not weakness. It is alignment. When control ends, trust remains, and trust feels like softness, heaviness, and release. The body responds immediately. Breathing slows. Muscles let go. Thought loses urgency. Sleep often arrives quietly after this shift. There is no signal, no announcement. Control simply fades, and the body continues without you noticing the moment you step aside. Tonight, you are allowed to let life continue without your guidance. Nothing important depends on your wakefulness. Nothing valuable is lost when you rest. When you trust this fully, even for a moment, the final barrier dissolves, and rest becomes natural again. 16. You do not need to disappear for sleep to happen. A quiet fear often hides beneath wakefulness at night. It is the fear that in order to sleep, you must somehow vanish, that you must lose awareness completely, lose control completely, lose yourself completely. For some people, this fear is subtle. For others, it is strong enough to keep them alert even when they are exhausted. Zen recognizes this fear and addresses it without force. Sleep does not require you to disappear. Many people unconsciously equate sleep with absence. Absence of thought, absence of awareness, absence of identity. When these absences do not arrive quickly, the mind resists, believing something has gone wrong. Zen gently corrects this misunderstanding by pointing out that sleep does not begin with disappearance. It begins with softening. You do not vanish when you sleep, you withdraw. Withdrawal is different from loss. Withdrawal means stepping back, not being erased. Awareness does not shut off abruptly. It loosens. Identity does not collapse. It fades into the background. Control does not break. It relaxes. The fear comes from imagining sleep as a cliff rather than a slope. Zen teaches that sleep is gradual, not sudden. The problem is not that awareness remains present for a while. The problem is that the mind interprets presence as failure. It thinks, if I am still aware, I must not be sleeping properly. This belief creates tension at the exact moment softness is needed. Awareness lingering is not an obstacle. It is part of the transition. Zen practitioners understand that there is a middle space between full wakefulness and unconscious sleep. In this space, thoughts are slower, attention is diffuse, and identity is lighter. You may still hear sounds, you may still notice sensations. This does not mean sleep is far away. It means it is approaching naturally. The mind interferes when it tries to label this space. It asks, am I asleep yet? Why am I still aware? Should this feel different? Each question pulls awareness back into sharpness. Zen invites you to let awareness remain unfocused, without commentary. You are allowed to stay present while drifting. You are allowed to be aware without being alert. This is difficult only because the mind believes awareness must always be in control. Zen separates awareness from control completely. Awareness can exist without directing anything. It can float without gripping. Think of how you listen to distant sounds without focusing on them. You are aware, but not engaged. That same quality of awareness can coexist with sleep. You do not need to turn awareness off. You only need to let it stop organizing experience. Sleep does not require darkness inside the mind. It requires softness. When the mind stops insisting on disappearance, the body relaxes further. The nervous system no longer feels threatened by the transition. Vigilance fades because there is nothing to protect against. Zen teaches that you do not cross into sleep. You sink into it. Sinking does not require jumping. It requires letting go of resistance to gravity. Tonight, you are not trying to disappear. You are allowing yourself to soften. You may notice moments of awareness followed by gaps. You may drift and return briefly. This is not failure. This is how the system learns it is safe to let go further. Eventually, awareness loosens its hold without instruction. Identity fades without effort. Sleep arrives not because you forced yourself to vanish, but because you stopped fearing presence. You do not need to disappear for sleep to happen. You only need to stop holding yourself upright. And when you do, rest carries you naturally, quietly, without asking anything more from you. 17. Nothing you experience tonight is a mistake. One of the most subtle sources of tension at night is the belief that something is going wrong. A thought appears, and you assume it should not be there. Awareness remains, and you assume it should have faded. Sleep does not arrive quickly, and you assume you are failing. Zen directly challenges this belief by removing the idea of error altogether. Nothing you experience tonight is a mistake. Zen does not divide experience into correct and incorrect states. It does not label wakefulness as bad and sleep as good. It does not rank calm above restlessness or silence above sound. These judgments belong to the thinking mind. The body does not share them. When you believe something is wrong, effort appears automatically. Effort tightens the system. Tightness keeps the nervous system alert. Alertness delays sleep. The belief in error becomes self-fulfilling. Zen dissolves this loop by changing the frame. What if nothing needs correction? A thought appearing is not a problem. Awareness lingering is not a failure. Restlessness rising is not a setback. Each of these experiences is simply part of the system, transitioning at its own pace. At night, the mind often wants reassurance. It wants to know that what is happening is acceptable. Zen offers reassurance not by promising outcomes, but by removing judgment. When judgment fades, tension fades with it. Consider how differently the body responds when you believe something is allowed versus when you believe it must be fixed. Allowance signals safety. Correction signals threat. The nervous system reacts accordingly. Zen practice at night is not about steering experience. It is about letting experience unfold without labeling it as right or wrong. If you are awake, that is the current state. If thoughts are active, that is the current state. If sensations change, that is the current state. None of these states require intervention. The mind resists this because it is trained to optimize. It wants to improve conditions. But optimization belongs to the day. At night, optimization becomes interference. Zen teachers often remind students that the body knows how to move toward balance if it is not judged along the way. Judgment interrupts this movement by introducing effort. This is why people often fall asleep after they stop caring whether they are asleep. The moment you decide that wakefulness is acceptable, wakefulness loses its charge. Without charge, the system relaxes. Nothing is going wrong because nothing is required. The night does not demand progress. It does not demand change. It does not demand that you feel a certain way. It simply unfolds. When you stop treating your experience as a problem, the need to manage it disappears. Awareness softens. Attention broadens. The system no longer braces. Sleep may arrive soon or later. Zen does not guarantee timing. It guarantees relief from unnecessary pressure. Tonight you are not here to fix yourself. You are not here to improve your state. You are not here to correct experience. You are here to allow it. Nothing you experience tonight is a mistake. And when the belief in mistake dissolves, the final layer of struggle falls away. What remains is ease. 18. The mind tires itself out when you stop interfering. There is a quiet intelligence in the mind that most people never experience because they are always trying to manage it. They assume the mind must be directed, corrected, or silenced. Zen takes a very different view. It recognizes that the mind, like the body, has its own natural cycle of activity and rest. The problem is not that the mind keeps working at night. The problem is that you keep interrupting its natural exhaustion. When the mind is allowed to move freely without interference, it eventually slows down on its own. During the day, mental activity is constantly refreshed by stimulation. Conversations, screens, decisions, emotions, and obligations all add fuel. At night, that fuel supply is cut off. If the mind were left alone, it would gradually lose momentum. But most people do not leave it alone. They argue with it. They evaluate it. They try to steer it towards sleep. Each of these actions gives the mind new energy. Zen points out something simple but powerful. The mind stays awake as long as it is engaged. Engagement does not mean thinking. It means involvement. You can have thoughts without involvement. You can have awareness without control. You can have activity without effort. Involvement is what keeps the system alert. When a thought appears and you follow it, you refresh it. When a thought appears and you judge it, you refresh it. When a thought appears and you try to stop it, you refresh it. The mind interprets all of these as signals that its activity is needed. Zen invites you to try something counterintuitive. Let the mind think without responding. This does not mean you encourage thought. It means you stop reacting to it. You do not complete the thought. You do not reject it. You do not label it. You let it unfold and end on its own. At first, the mind may become busier. This is not a failure. It is a test. Like a machine that increases output when it senses resistance, the mind produces more content to regain attention. Zen teaches that this phase passes if you do not engage. When the mind realizes there is no response, it begins to slow, not abruptly, but naturally. Thoughts lose complexity. Narratives shorten. Images fade more quickly. Gaps appear without effort. This is the mind tiring itself out. Zen trusts this process completely. It does not rush it. It does not intervene. It understands that exhaustion without resistance leads to rest, while exhaustion with resistance leads to agitation. Think of how the body behaves after physical effort. If you keep tensing muscles after activity, fatigue feels painful. If you allow muscles to release, fatigue turns into rest. The mind works the same way. Mental fatigue becomes rest only when effort stops. At night, you are not required to make the mind quiet. You are only asked to stop stimulating it with reaction. When reaction ends, the mind completes its cycle. This is why sleep often arrives unexpectedly. You are listening, drifting, or simply lying still, and suddenly there is a gap you do not remember crossing. The mind did not shut off, it wound down. Zen practice does not fear mental activity. It respects its ability to end when not interfered with. Tonight, let the mind do what it needs to do. Let it move. Let it slow. Let it tire. You do not need to supervise the process. You do not need to know when it will end. You only need to stop refreshing it with effort. When the mind is finally allowed to exhaust itself, it releases control willingly. Not because it was forced, but because it no longer has a reason to continue. And in that release, sleep arrives quietly, naturally, without struggle. 19. Even wakefulness can be a form of rest. One of the most damaging beliefs about sleep is the idea that being awake is automatically harmful. Many people lie in bed already tense because they are afraid of not sleeping. They calculate how tired tomorrow will be. They imagine consequences. This fear turns wakefulness into an enemy. Zen dissolves this fear by changing how wakefulness itself is understood. Wakefulness does not have to be a struggle. The body distinguishes between alert wakefulness and relaxed wakefulness. Alert wakefulness involves tension, vigilance, and effort. Relaxed wakefulness involves softness, openness, and lack of demand. The difference between the two is not consciousness, it is resistance. Zen teaches that rest is not identical to unconsciousness. Rest is the absence of strain. When strain ends, even awareness becomes restorative. This is why people can feel refreshed after quietly resting, even if they believe they did not sleep deeply. The nervous system recovered because it was not under pressure. Zen recognizes this and removes the fear that every moment awake is wasted. At night, fear of wakefulness keeps the system alert. The mind believes it must avoid being awake at all costs. This belief creates urgency. Urgency signals danger. Danger keeps the system awake. Zen breaks this loop by allowing wakefulness. If you are awake, that is acceptable. If awareness remains, that is acceptable. If sleep comes later, that is acceptable. Allowance removes fear. Without fear, wakefulness loses its charge. Zen does not encourage staying awake. It encourages stopping the fight against being awake. When you stop fighting, the quality of wakefulness changes. It becomes softer, less directed, less demanding. In this softer state, the body still benefits. Muscles release, breathing deepens, heart rate slows, hormonal recovery begins. Even if sleep has not yet arrived, the system is no longer being taxed. This is why people often fall asleep after giving up on sleep. They stop resisting wakefulness, and wakefulness turns into rest. From rest, sleep emerges naturally. Zen does not tell you to enjoy being awake. It tells you to stop punishing yourself for it. When wakefulness is no longer labeled as failure, the nervous system stops bracing. When bracing ends, vigilance fades. When vigilance fades, sleep becomes possible again. Tonight you do not need to escape wakefulness. Tonight you do not need to escape wakefulness. You do not need to fear it. You do not need to fix it. You are allowed to rest while awake. Rest is not a binary switch. It is a spectrum. Every moment without resistance contributes to recovery. Every moment of softness restores balance. Sleep may arrive sooner or later. Zen does not rush it. It removes the pressure that prevents it. Even wakefulness can be a form of rest when struggle ends. And when rest is already present, sleep no longer has to fight its way in. 20. The day is already over. You do not need to carry it any further. One of the heaviest burdens the mind carries into the night is the belief that the day is not finished yet. Thoughts replay conversations, unfinished tasks, missed opportunities, and imagined alternatives. The mind keeps walking through the same territory, as if revisiting it might change what has already happened. Zen addresses this habit gently but firmly by pointing out a simple truth. The day is already over. Nothing you think tonight can alter what has passed. No amount of review can improve a moment that has already ended. The mind continues, not because review is useful, but because it has not yet accepted closure. Zen teaches that closure is not something you create by thinking. It is something you allow by stopping. During the day, momentum keeps the mind moving forward. Action leads to reaction. Task follows task. When the day ends, momentum does not immediately disappear. The mind continues walking because it has not been told the journey is complete. Zen practice provides that message, not through force, but through recognition. This day does not require your attention anymore. Replaying the past at night is not wisdom. It is habit. Planning tomorrow at night is not preparation. It is displacement. Both keep the mind active because they avoid the simplicity of stopping. Zen does not criticize these habits. It simply shows their cost. Carrying the day into the night keeps the nervous system engaged. Engagement prevents rest. Letting the day end is not irresponsibility. It is accuracy. The day has already ended whether you acknowledge it or not. Your recognition simply allows the system to align with reality. When you accept that the day is complete, something loosens. The mind no longer needs to keep records. It no longer needs to rehearse. It no longer needs to correct. This acceptance does not require ritual. You do not need to review the day. You do not need to forgive yourself or others. You only need to stop bringing the day forward. Zen understands that the body responds immediately to this shift. Muscles that were held for action begin to soften. Breathing slows. The sense of forward motion fades. The mind may still produce thoughts about the day. That is normal. The difference is that these thoughts no longer feel urgent. They are seen as echoes, not assignments. You are not abandoning your responsibilities. You are placing them in time. They belong to tomorrow, not tonight. Tonight, nothing from the day needs to be carried. Nothing needs to be remembered. Nothing needs to be fixed. The day has already done what it was going to do. When you stop carrying it, the weight lifts. The system recognizes that there is no longer any demand. In that absence of demand, rest deepens. Sleep does not arrive because the day was perfect. It arrives because the day was allowed to end. And when the day ends fully, without being dragged into the dark, the night is free to do what it exists to do. Restore. 21. You do not need to understand this moment for it to pass. A quiet habit keeps the mind active at night more than almost anything else. The need to understand what is happening. The mind wants to know why it feels this way, how long it will last, what it means, and what should be done next. It believes that understanding is necessary for resolution. Zen gently removes this belief. Understanding is not required for rest. During the day, understanding helps you navigate the world. You interpret signals, make sense of situations, and decide how to respond. At night, this same habit becomes interference. The mind keeps asking questions, even though there is nothing to act on. Questions without action turn into loops. Zen makes a clear distinction between usefulness and compulsion. Understanding is useful when it leads to action. At night, understanding rarely leads anywhere. It only keeps attention active. You do not need to understand why you are awake. You do not need to understand your thoughts. You do not need to understand your emotions. The moment you believe you must understand, effort appears. Effort tightens the system. Tightness prevents rest. Zen does not reject understanding. It places it in the correct time. Night is not the time for clarity. Night is the time for suspension. Things are allowed to be unresolved without being dangerous. The mind resists this because it equates lack of understanding with loss of control. Zen reveals that control is already unnecessary here. Nothing in this moment requires a decision. Nothing requires interpretation. Nothing requires explanation. Experience continues, whether it is understood or not. Think of how many bodily processes occur without your understanding. You do not understand digestion, yet it happens. You do not understand healing, yet it occurs. Sleep belongs to this category. It does not require comprehension. At night, the mind often tries to diagnose itself. It labels sensations, emotions, and thoughts, hoping the correct label will bring relief. Zen shows that labeling is just another form of activity. When labeling stops, sensation becomes simpler, emotion becomes lighter, thought loses structure. You are not required to know what this moment means. You are not required to know what comes next. You are not required to know when sleep will arrive. The moment no longer needs to make sense. When you stop trying to understand, awareness widens. It no longer focuses narrowly on content. It becomes open, receptive, and non-demanding. The nervous system responds to this openness by downshifting. This is why people often fall asleep when they stop thinking about their sleep problem. The problem dissolves when it is no longer examined. Zen teaches trust in process over explanation. The process does not ask to be understood. It asks to be allowed. Tonight you are not here to figure anything out. You are here to let experience move without commentary. Thoughts may appear without being interpreted. Sensations may shift without being explained. Awareness may drift without being guided. All of this is fine. Nothing needs to be understood for this moment to pass. And when understanding steps aside, effort ends. When effort ends, the system relaxes. When the system relaxes, sleep no longer meets resistance. The moment passes on its own, just as it always has. 22. Rest happens when you stop waiting for permission. One of the last invisible barriers to rest is the belief that you must be allowed to rest. Many people carry an internal authority into the night, a voice that decides whether they have done enough, whether they deserve sleep, whether it is acceptable to stop. This voice is quiet but powerful. It delays rest by making it conditional. Zen removes this condition completely. You do not need permission to rest. During the day, effort is rewarded, productivity is praised, endurance is admired. Over time, the mind absorbs the idea that stopping must be justified. When night arrives, this belief does not automatically dissolve. The mind reviews the day and silently asks whether rest has been earned. This question keeps the system alert. Zen points out that rest is not a moral outcome. It is not something granted after performance. It is a biological necessity. The body does not negotiate rest. It requires it regardless of productivity, success, or completion. When you believe you must earn rest, you keep working internally. You replay the day. You rehearse tomorrow. You measure your worth by how much you did or did not do. This internal labor prevents the nervous system from standing down. Zen invites you to notice that nothing in this moment is asking for effort. No task requires attention. No decision is being made. No response is needed. The only thing maintaining activity is the belief that you are not yet allowed to stop. This belief often disguises itself as responsibility. It feels serious and justified. Zen gently exposes it as unnecessary. You are not abandoning duty by resting. You are not being careless. You are not avoiding life. You are aligning with it. Rest does not weaken you. It restores your ability to respond when response is actually required. Zen understands that a system that never stands down eventually breaks. At night, permission does not come from reflection or approval. It comes from recognition. Recognition that the day has ended. Recognition that nothing more can be done now. Recognition that continuing to hold yourself upright is no longer useful. When this recognition becomes clear, permission is no longer needed. The body responds immediately. Muscles soften because they are no longer being judged. Breathing deepens because there is no demand. Awareness relaxes because it is no longer being supervised. Sleep often follows this release. Not because you decided to rest, but because you stopped preventing it by waiting for approval. Zen teaches that rest is not something you allow yourself. It is something that happens when self-judgment ends. Tonight, you do not need to justify stopping. You do not need to review your worth. You do not need to convince yourself that rest is acceptable. Rest is already permitted by the body's design. When you stop waiting for permission, the final barrier dissolves. What remains is simplicity. And in that simplicity, the system finally lets go. Sleep arrives not as a reward, but as a return. 23. The mind rests when it realizes there is nothing left to protect. At the deepest level, the mind stays awake because it believes something still needs guarding. This belief is rarely conscious. It does not announce itself clearly. It hides beneath thoughts, beneath alertness, beneath the feeling that you must remain slightly ready, slightly attentive, slightly prepared. Zen looks directly at this layer, because this is often the final reason sleep is delayed, even after everything else has softened. The mind is a protector by nature. It evolved to scan for danger, anticipate threats, and prepare responses. During the day, this function is useful. It keeps you oriented in the world. At night, when the external world withdraws, the protector turns inward. With no immediate threats to manage, it begins guarding ideas, memories, identities, and imagined futures. The mind does not rest because it does not yet realize that nothing needs protection right now. This realization cannot be forced. It emerges slowly when vigilance proves unnecessary. Throughout the night, the mind quietly asks questions. What if something goes wrong tomorrow? What if I forget something important? What if this feeling means something is wrong? What if I lose control? What if I let go too much? Each question is not really a request for an answer. It is a signal of guarding. Zen does not respond to these questions with reassurance. Reassurance still engages the protector. Instead, Zen removes the context in which the questions make sense. Protection is only needed when something is under threat. At night, lying still, there is no immediate threat. The body is safe. The environment is stable. The present moment does not demand action. Yet the mind continues to guard because it has not yet recognized that the situation has changed. This is not stubbornness. It is habit. The protector does not stop just because you tell it to. It stops when it sees clearly that its work is unnecessary. Zen practice does not attack the protector. It allows it to exhaust itself. When thoughts arise, you do not chase them. When worries appear, you do not solve them. When vigilance tightens, you do not argue with it. You simply do not provide confirmation that guarding is required. Over time, the protector notices something important. Nothing bad happens when it loosens. Nothing collapses when it steps back. Awareness remains. The body remains. Breathing continues. The world does not fall apart. This is how trust is rebuilt. Trust is not a belief you adopt. It is a conclusion the system reaches through experience. Each moment of non-interference teaches the protector that its effort is not needed. Zen understands that the mind will test this repeatedly. It will release slightly, then tighten again. It will drift, then return. This is not regression. It is calibration. The system is learning how much vigilance is actually required, which at night is very little. As this learning deepens, guarding softens. The mind no longer scans aggressively. Thoughts become less strategic and more fragmentary. Planning loses coherence. Narratives fall apart. This is not confusion. It is the protector standing down. At this stage, many people panic slightly. They feel a loss of sharpness, a fading of control, a dissolving of identity. Zen recognizes this moment clearly. It is the moment the mind realizes it no longer needs to protect the self in the same way. The fear is understandable. The protector has been active for years. Letting go feels like vulnerability. Zen does not rush this moment. It allows it to unfold at its own pace. You are not being erased. You are being unguarded. There is a profound difference. When guarding ends, awareness does not disappear. It becomes spacious, unfocused, gentle. It no longer orients around defense. It simply knows what is present without bracing. In this state, time loses importance. Identity loses sharp edges. Thoughts lose urgency. Sensations are no longer interpreted as signals. They are simply felt and released. This is deep rest, whether sleep has arrived or not. Zen does not privilege unconsciousness over this state. It sees this state as already complete. Sleep often follows naturally because there is nothing left to keep the system awake. But even if sleep lingers, the body is already recovering. The protector has done its job. It has ensured safety long enough to stand down. Nothing more is required. The idea that something must be protected dissolves quietly. There is no announcement, no decision, just a gradual realization that there is nothing to defend against in this moment. When this realization settles, effort ends completely. The body does not need to be watched. The breath does not need to be controlled. The future does not need rehearsal. The past does not need review. Awareness rests in itself. From here, sleep is not an achievement. It is simply the next natural shift. Sometimes it arrives quickly, sometimes slowly. Sometimes you only realize it happened when you wake. Zen does not promise timing, it promises truth. The truth is that tonight, nothing needs protection. You are safe enough to rest. The world is stable enough to continue. Life does not require your vigilance right now. When the mind finally understands this, not intellectually but physically, the last tension dissolves. And what remains is not effort, not striving, not guarding. It is ease. And from ease, sleep comes naturally, quietly, without resistance. 24. There is nothing you need to become tonight. At the deepest layer of restlessness lies a belief so familiar that it often goes unnoticed, the belief that you are not yet finished being who you need to be. During the day, this belief drives improvement, adaptation, learning, and survival. At night, when there is no arena for action, it becomes the quiet force that keeps the mind awake. Zen looks directly at this belief because as long as becoming feels unfinished, rest feels premature. The mind stays active because it thinks you are still in progress. This does not always appear as ambition or self-criticism. Sometimes it appears as subtle comparison. Who you were today versus who you should have been. Who you are now versus who you imagine yourself becoming. Even peaceful goals can keep the system alert if they imply that the present moment is insufficient. Zen dismantles this tension by removing the demand to become anything at all, especially at night. Becoming belongs to time. Rest belongs to completeness. During the day, the mind organizes experience around movement. Forward motion is rewarded. Improvement is celebrated. Errors are corrected. This creates an identity built on trajectory. You are defined by where you are going. When night arrives, the environment no longer supports forward motion, but the identity remains active. The mind keeps trying to advance, refine, and adjust, even though there is nowhere to go. This mismatch creates strain. Zen does not reject growth. It places growth in the correct rhythm. Growth requires effort, direction, and friction. Rest requires the absence of all three. Trying to grow at night is like trying to walk while lying down. The impulse itself creates discomfort. At night, you are not meant to improve. You are meant to be. This is difficult because the mind confuses being with stagnation. It fears that if it stops becoming, it will lose momentum, fall behind, or dissolve. Zen gently shows that being is not regression. Being is stabilization. Without stabilization, growth becomes chaotic and unsustainable. The body understands this instinctively. Muscles do not grow while contracted. Healing does not occur while inflamed. Recovery requires stillness. Identity is no different. When the mind insists on becoming at night, it keeps reviewing. It replays conversations to improve them. It imagines future versions of itself handling situations better. It rehearses outcomes, not because action is possible, but because identity feels unfinished. Zen invites you to see that this activity is unnecessary now. You are not required to refine yourself tonight. You are not required to prepare yourself tonight. You are not required to understand yourself tonight. You are already enough to rest. This statement is not motivational. It is practical. The body cannot recover while identity is under construction. The nervous system cannot downshift while the mind is still drafting a better version of you. Zen does not ask you to abandon who you want to become. It asks you to stop dragging that future into the present moment. The future has its own time. Night is not it. A Zen teacher once said that a person who cannot rest as they are will never be satisfied as they become. This is not a warning, it is an observation. Satisfaction does not come from completion. It comes from cessation. Cessation of comparison, cessation of rehearsal, cessation of self-editing. At night, the self does not need improvement. It needs permission to remain unfinished. When you allow yourself to be incomplete without urgency, something softens. The mind stops measuring. It stops leaning forward. The sense of self becomes less rigid. Identity loosens because it no longer has to defend its trajectory. This loosening can feel unfamiliar. Some people interpret it as emptiness or loss of direction. Zen recognizes it as relief. The weight of becoming lifts. Awareness no longer has to carry a narrative. You are not erasing yourself. You are suspending the need to advance. In this suspension, the system finally relaxes. Thoughts may still arise, but they lose their project-oriented quality. They are no longer about fixing, improving, or becoming. They drift without agenda. Without agenda, they cannot sustain themselves. The body responds immediately to this shift. Breathing deepens. Muscles release. The sense of time softens. The need to monitor fades. The protector no longer has a role, because there is nothing to defend, nothing to achieve, nothing to prove. Sleep often arrives here, not because the mind finally succeeded, but because it finally stopped trying to become someone else. Zen teaches that night is not a pause in your journey. It is a return to ground. You step off the path of progress and stand still, not to abandon movement, but to remember stability. You do not need to be better to rest. You do not need to be wiser. You do not need to be calmer. You do not need to be healed. You need to stop becoming long enough for the system to recover. This is not surrender in the dramatic sense. It is surrender to what already is. The moment no longer resists itself. Identity no longer leans forward. Awareness rests without direction. From this place, sleep is not an achievement. It is simply the body continuing its natural cycle once the demand to become has ended. Tonight, you are not a project. You are not a problem. You are not unfinished in a way that matters. You are complete enough to rest. And when the mind finally understands this, not as an idea but as a felt truth, it lets go of its last reason to stay awake. What follows is not effort, not striving, not self-improvement. It is rest. 25. You can let the night hold you. At some point, restlessness stops being about thoughts, control, effort, fear, or identity. All of those layers soften, and yet wakefulness may still remain. This is the moment Zen speaks to most directly, because this is where the mind finally runs out of strategies. Nothing is obviously wrong, nothing feels urgent, and still, you are here. Zen does not rush past this moment. It settles into it. What remains now is not a problem to solve, but a relationship to shift. The relationship between you and the night itself. Most people experience the night as something they must pass through. They endure it. They wait it out. They hope it ends quickly, even when trying to sleep. There is a subtle sense of being unsupported, as if you are still holding yourself upright in the dark. Zen invites a different experience. You do not need to hold yourself anymore. You can let the night hold you. This idea may sound abstract, but it is deeply physical. Throughout the day, you are constantly bracing. Your posture adapts. Your attention sharpens. Your nervous system stays slightly contracted in anticipation of the next demand. At night, even when lying down, this bracing often continues invisibly. The body is horizontal, but the system is still upright inside. Zen recognizes that true rest begins when this internal holding stops. You do not rest by collapsing. You rest by being supported. Support is not something you create. It is something you allow yourself to feel. The surface beneath you is already holding your weight. Gravity is already doing its work. The air does not require effort to breathe. Sounds come and go without asking anything of you. Time continues without your participation. The night is already carrying everything. The mind stays awake when it believes it must remain self-supporting. It keeps a subtle grip on awareness, as if letting go completely would mean falling into something unsafe. Zen gently shows that there is nothing to fall into. You are already resting in something larger than effort. This is not a metaphor. It is a felt shift. When you stop holding yourself, the body responds immediately. Muscles that were quietly engaged release further. Breathing drops deeper into the abdomen. The chest softens. The jaw loosens. These changes are not commands. They are consequences of no longer needing to support yourself. Zen practice does not ask you to relax these areas. It asks you to notice that they relax when holding ends. The mind, sensing this support, loses its final reason to stay alert. Vigilance fades not because it was defeated, but because it is no longer needed. Awareness becomes wide, uncontracted, and unguarded. This is where many people finally drift, not because sleep was forced, but because wakefulness no longer requires effort. The night does not need you to manage it. It does not need you to understand it. It does not need you to move through it correctly. It is already here, steady and indifferent in the most peaceful way. When Zen speaks of trust, this is what it means. Trust is allowing yourself to be held by what is already supporting you, not intellectually, but physically, moment by moment. You are not alone in the dark. You are not suspended in uncertainty. You are not responsible for staying awake or falling asleep. You are already supported. At this point, sleep may arrive quickly, or it may arrive slowly. Zen does not interfere with the timing. Timing no longer matters. The body is resting either way. The system has finally stopped resisting gravity, stopped resisting time, stopped resisting the night. Sometimes sleep comes as a gentle fade. Sometimes it comes in waves. Sometimes awareness loosens gradually, with brief returns. None of this is a mistake. It is simply the body finding its depth. Zen does not promise a perfect night. It promises something more reliable, the end of self-holding. Tonight you do not need to stay upright inside. You do not need to keep watch. You do not need to carry yourself through the dark. You can let the night hold you, and when you do, even briefly, the final tension dissolves. What remains is not effort, not vigilance, not becoming. What remains is being carried. From there, sleep comes naturally, quietly, without instruction, as it always has when nothing is left to resist. 26. When nothing is asked of you, the system finally stands down. At the very end of wakefulness, there is often one last quiet tension that remains. It is not loud. It does not announce itself as anxiety or effort. It feels more like a subtle readiness, a background posture of being available in case something is needed. Zen recognizes this posture clearly because it is the final thing that keeps the system upright. The system stays alert because it believes it might still be called upon. Throughout your life you have learned to be ready. Ready to respond, ready to explain, ready to adjust, ready to act. Even in moments of rest, this readiness can persist quietly, like a light left on in an empty room. You may not notice it directly, but it consumes energy. It keeps awareness slightly forward-leaning, slightly engaged. Zen does not treat this readiness as a flaw. It treats it as a learned response that no longer applies at night. At this hour, nothing is asking for you. No decision is pending. No response is required. No explanation is expected. No improvement is demanded. Yet the system does not always recognize this immediately. It has been conditioned to stay available. Zen allows this conditioning to unwind gently by removing all cues that would require engagement. When nothing is asked of you, the body begins to release its final layers of tension. The shoulders drop further. The muscles along the spine soften. The breath becomes quieter, not because it is controlled, but because there is no longer any need to support readiness. The mind also responds. Thoughts lose their directive quality. They no longer suggest action or correction. They drift without pointing anywhere. Attention no longer searches for relevance. Awareness stops scanning. This is what it means for the system to stand down. Standing down is not collapse. It is not exhaustion. It is not shutting off. It is the deliberate ending of alertness, when alertness is no longer useful. Zen understands that alertness is a tool, not an identity. Tools are set down when they are not needed. The difficulty is that many people do not know how to set alertness down without fear. They believe that if they stop being available, something important will be missed. Zen resolves this fear, not with reassurance but with reality. There is nothing to miss in this moment. The present does not require vigilance. When the system realizes this, a profound quiet emerges, not silence in the sense of emptiness, but quiet in the sense of completion. Everything that needed doing has already been done by time itself. The day ended, the environment stabilized, the body is supported, the future is inaccessible, There is nowhere to go and nothing to prepare for. In this quiet, awareness no longer has a role to play. It does not disappear, it simply rests without function. This kind of awareness is not sharp or focused. It is wide and non-specific. It does not hold on to content. It does not push anything away. Zen regards this as the natural resting state of the system. Sleep often arrives shortly after this point, but Zen does not insist on that. Even if sleep lingers, the system is already resting deeply because alertness has been withdrawn. Recovery is already happening. This is why people sometimes wake feeling restored, even if they believe they did not sleep enough. The system stood down. That matters more than the clock. At night, you are not on call. You are not needed. You are not required to remain available. The world does not expect anything from you right now. When this truth is felt, not thought about, the final tension dissolves. The nervous system completes its shift from engagement to restoration. The body no longer braces. The mind no longer waits. Awareness no longer leans forward. Nothing is asked of you, and because nothing is asked, nothing is withheld. From this place, sleep does not need to be invited. It comes when it comes, and if it does not come immediately, rest is already complete. The system has finally stood down, and in that standing down, the night fulfills its purpose. 27. You are already where rest happens. At the very end of all effort, there is often one final misunderstanding that keeps the mind faintly awake. It is the belief that rest is somewhere else, somewhere deeper, somewhere quieter, somewhere you have not reached yet. Even after everything has softened, this belief can remain. Like a distant horizon, the mind keeps glancing toward. Zen dissolves this last illusion gently, because it is not aggressive or anxious. It is simply habitual. You believe rest is ahead of you. Zen shows that rest is already here. From childhood onward, you were taught that relief comes later, after work is finished, after understanding arrives, after problems are solved, after improvement is achieved. This training is useful during the day, but it quietly follows you into the night. The mind keeps leaning forward, waiting for a moment when rest will finally be justified. That forward lean is the last movement that keeps wakefulness intact. Zen invites you to notice something very subtle. There is no distance between you and rest. There is only the idea of distance. Right now, as you are, without changing posture, without altering breath, without calming thought, you are already in the conditions where rest occurs. The body is supported. The environment is stable. The day is over. There is no immediate demand. Nothing is missing. What remains is the belief that something else must happen. Zen does not argue with this belief. It simply asks you to look at your direct experience. Is rest actually absent, or is it being overlooked because it does not look dramatic enough? Rest is not always heavy. It is not always silent. It is not always unconscious. Sometimes rest is simply the absence of urgency. Sometimes it is the lack of direction. Sometimes it is the feeling that nothing needs to improve. These qualities may already be present, but the mind ignores them because they do not match its expectations. The mind expects rest to feel like an event. Zen reveals that rest feels more like a settling. It is quiet, ordinary, and easily missed if you are waiting for something extraordinary. This is why people often say they fell asleep without realizing it. They were looking for a threshold, but sleep arrived as a continuation, not a crossing. Rest works the same way. It does not announce itself. It simply becomes obvious once you stop looking past it. At this stage, the mind may still wander, sensations may still shift, awareness may still be present. None of this means rest is absent. It means rest is not dependent on conditions anymore. Zen teaches that true rest is locationless. It does not live in a future state. It lives in the removal of seeking. Seeking is the final movement. When seeking ends, rest is revealed as the background of everything that is already happening. You do not need to arrive anywhere. You do not need to sink deeper. You do not need to let go more completely. There is nothing further to do because nothing further is required. The mind relaxes when it realizes it has reached the end of its path. There is nowhere else to go, not because of limitation, but because arrival has already occurred. This realization does not feel triumphant. It feels neutral, ordinary, and deeply relieving. The system stops orienting itself. Attention stops scanning. Awareness stops leaning. From here, sleep may come quickly, slowly, or in waves. Zen no longer interferes. Timing has lost relevance. Rest is already present, and sleep is simply one expression of it. You are not on the way to rest. You are not approaching it. You are not waiting for it. You are already where rest happens. And when this is no longer questioned, the mind finally releases its last reason to remain awake. What follows is not effort, not striving, not technique. It is simply the night continuing without resistance, carrying you naturally into whatever comes next. 28. Even this moment is allowed to be exactly as it is. At the very end of the night's unfolding, there is one final habit that can remain, so subtle that it almost feels invisible. It is the habit of quiet correction. Not dramatic resistance, not obvious effort, but a faint sense that this moment could be slightly better, slightly calmer, slightly closer to sleep. Zen notices this habit with great care because it is often the last thread holding the mind upright. Zen does not cut this thread. It lets it fall away on its own. The mind has been trained for a lifetime to adjust experience. Even when nothing is obviously wrong, it keeps checking. It asks whether the body is comfortable enough, whether the mind is peaceful enough, whether awareness should soften more. This checking feels responsible. It feels attentive. But it still contains a subtle message. This moment is not yet complete. Zen gently removes that message. This moment does not need improvement. Not later, not after one more release. Not after one more shift. Right now, this is difficult to accept because the mind associates acceptance with stagnation. It fears that if it allows the moment to be exactly as it is, nothing will change. Zen reveals the opposite. Change happens most easily when acceptance is complete. When the moment is no longer being pushed away, it is free to transform on its own. At night, the mind often waits for a sign that it is finally okay to stop. It waits for heaviness, silence, drifting, or loss of awareness. Zen points out that waiting itself is a refusal to accept what is already here. If awareness is present, that is allowed. If thoughts arise, that is allowed. If sleep has not yet arrived, that is allowed. Allowance is not resignation. It is the end of opposition. Opposition keeps the system activated. Even gentle opposition, even hopeful opposition, signals that something still needs to be managed. When opposition ends, the nervous system recognizes safety at a deeper level. Zen understands that safety is not created by perfect conditions. It is created by the absence of threat. And threat does not only come from the outside, it also comes from the belief that the present moment is insufficient. When you stop trying to improve the moment stops needing improvement. This is not a technique. There is nothing to apply. It is simply a recognition that nothing in this moment is asking to be changed. Nothing is demanding adjustment. Nothing is out of place. The mind may resist this at first. It may produce one last surge of thought, one last question, one last attempt to engage. Zen does not suppress this. It allows it to pass without response. When there is no response, even refinement ends. At this point, awareness becomes profoundly neutral, not dull, not bright, just present without opinion. The body feels this neutrality as permission, permission to soften completely, permission to stop monitoring, permission to drift without direction. Sleep often arrives quietly after this recognition, but Zen does not focus on that. Whether sleep arrives now or later no longer matters. The system is already resting at the deepest level because nothing is being resisted. Even wakefulness in this state is gentle. It is not something you are doing, it is simply what remains when doing has ended. Zen's final teaching of the night is simple and uncompromising. There is nothing wrong with this moment. There is nothing missing from it. There is nothing that needs to change. When this is no longer questioned, the mind releases its last habit of adjustment. What remains is not effort, not control, not waiting. What remains is openness. And from that openness, sleep, rest, or quiet awareness flows naturally, without instruction, without pressure, without resistance. Even this moment is allowed. And because it is allowed, it finally lets you go. 29. There is nothing left to let go of. At the very end of all instruction, all insight, all permission, there is one final misunderstanding that sometimes remains. It is the belief that there must still be something to release. Some last knot, some final attachment, some hidden tension that once found and dropped will allow rest to fully arrive. Zen treats this belief carefully because it is subtle and sincere, but it is still a form of seeking. The idea that there is something left to let go of keeps the mind gently reaching. Zen points out that letting go is not infinite. There is a point where nothing is being held anymore, and yet the habit of releasing continues. At that point, the act of letting go becomes the last thing being held. This is where many people remain awake without realizing why. Everything feels softer, nothing feels urgent, and yet there is still a faint sense of doing, a sense of checking whether anything remains. This checking is not anxiety, it is momentum. Zen invites you to notice something quietly decisive. If you are still trying to let go, then letting go has not ended. And if letting go has not ended, effort has not ended either. At some point, release must stop. Not because it failed, but because it is complete. There is nothing wrong with the mind at this stage. It is simply continuing a process that is no longer needed. Like a hand opening again and again even after the object has already fallen away. Zen does not ask you to stop letting go. It asks you to see whether there is anything actually being held. Look carefully, without analysis. Is there something being gripped right now? Or is there only the idea that something must still be released? When this is seen clearly, effort ends on its own. You do not decide to stop letting go. You realize there is nothing left in your hands. This realization does not feel dramatic. It does not feel like relief or breakthrough. It feels ordinary, almost anticlimactic. The mind simply stops reaching because there is nowhere left to reach. At this point, awareness no longer orients toward improvement, release, or rest. It does not orient at all. It remains without direction, without task, without agenda. Zen considers this the end of the path for the night. Not because something has been achieved, but because nothing is being attempted anymore. When nothing is being held, the body no longer braces. When nothing is being released, the mind no longer moves. When nothing is being sought, time loses relevance. Sleep may arrive here, or it may not. Zen no longer cares. The system is already resting completely because all forms of effort have ended, including the effort to end effort. This is important. The mind often tries to finish itself. It wants a conclusion, a final step, a sense of closure. Zen denies the mind this satisfaction, not out of cruelty, but out of accuracy. Rest does not arrive as a conclusion. It arrives as the absence of continuation. There is nothing left to do. There is nothing left to drop. There is nothing left to resolve. Not because you did it all correctly, but because there was never as much to do as you thought. When this is fully seen, the mind stops organizing experience. It stops narrating. It stops positioning itself. Awareness remains, but it is no longer centered anywhere. From here, sleep is effortless because effort is no longer present, and if sleep does not come immediately, rest is already complete because nothing is being carried. Zen ends here, not with instruction, not with reassurance, not with promise, only with the recognition that there is nothing left to let go of. And in that recognition, the night finishes its work on its own. 30. Rest is not something that happens to you. It is what remains when you stop intervening. At the very end of the night's teaching, there is nothing left to explain, improve, surrender, release, or understand. All the previous lessons were not steps toward a goal. They were ways of removing interference. What remains now is not a new state, but the recognition of what has been present all along. Rest was never absent. It was only interrupted. The mind tends to believe that rest is an event that arrives from the outside, something that happens to you when conditions are correct. Zen reverses this belief completely. Rest is not added to experience. It is revealed when intervention ends. Intervention can be loud or subtle. It can look like control, effort, fear, hope, seeking, or even spiritual striving. All intervention shares one quality: it assumes the present moment is insufficient on its own. Zen ends by dissolving this assumption. Nothing needs to happen for rest to be present, because rest is not dependent on outcomes. It is dependent on the absence of interference. When you stop adjusting, correcting, monitoring, or waiting, the system returns to its natural baseline. This baseline is not dramatic. It is not blissful. It is not special. It is ordinary, quiet, and deeply stable. The reason many people miss it is because they expect rest to feel like something new. Zen points out that rest feels like the absence of something familiar: effort. When effort ends, the body does not announce it. It simply stops bracing. The nervous system does not celebrate. It downshifts. Awareness does not disappear. It stops leaning. This is the most important understanding of all. You do not rest by doing something right. You rest by stopping what is unnecessary. The body already knows how to settle when it is not being overridden. The mind already knows how to quiet when it is not being stimulated by reaction. Awareness already knows how to remain without effort when it is not tasked with control. Zen does not teach you how to rest. It removes the habits that prevent it. At this point, there is nothing left to apply. Any attempt to apply something would be another form of intervention. Zen leaves you here deliberately, without instruction, without guidance, without reassurance. Because reassurance would suggest doubt. Guidance would suggest direction. Instruction would suggest a task, and there is no task. The night does not need your cooperation. It only needed your non-interference. Now that interference has ended, the system does what it has always done when left alone. Sometimes sleep comes. Sometimes quiet awareness remains. Sometimes there is drifting, fading, returning. Zen makes no distinction between these. They are all expressions of rest when effort is absent. You are no longer trying to sleep. You are no longer trying to rest. You are no longer trying to let go. Trying has ended. From here, whatever happens is sufficient. The system has completed its work for the night. Nothing more is required of you. Not now, not later, not at any point in this moment. Rest is not approaching. Rest is not arriving. Rest is not waiting. Rest is what remains when nothing interferes. And because nothing is interfering now, the night can complete itself in whatever way it chooses, quietly, naturally, without your involvement. This is the end of instruction. Not because you reach something, but because there is nothing left to interrupt what was already here. The night does not need anything more from you. You have not missed a step. You have not failed to arrive. There is nothing left to understand, release, or complete. Whatever state you are in right now is enough. Whatever awareness remains is allowed. Whatever comes next does not require your participation. You do not need to fall asleep. You do not need to stay awake. You do not need to do anything at all. The body knows how to rest. The mind knows how to quiet when it is no longer disturbed. Life knows how to continue without your effort. So let this be the end of seeking, the end of listening for change, the end of waiting for permission. From here the night carries you on its own. Nothing more is required. And if sleep comes, let it come. If it doesn't, let rest remain. Either way, you are already held,